Cool.
Good morning, everyone. Wow, we've got 8 attendees coming in. Welcome, everybody. We're going to just give everybody a minute or so before we get started. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. We have 14 attendees so far. We're just going to wait, give everybody a few minutes to beat that traffic.
At least they're not going to DEFCON, so.
We're just waiting for everybody to pick up their reminders on email and go, oh, this is super cool. Got to get on this. Hopefully the boss is not calling and everybody else has got their coffee. Hello, Carl. Nice to see your face.
Hello. Seeing lots of beautiful attendees popping in.
I'll give it another 30 seconds and then we'll do the official welcome. Good morning, welcome. You're at the right place for your winter warmers. Okay, cool beans. So we've got a lot to get through, so I'm going to get going. So welcome, everybody. On behalf of Obsidian Systems, thank you for joining our DevSecOps webinar. We're hoping you're going to buckle up and enjoy the journey with us. I know what you're thinking, DevSecOps, it's another buzzword, it's a secret code, possibly for a superhuman or superhero team and superhuman teams out there. And I don't think we're that far off from that. I think DevSecOps does bring together the mighty powers of development, of security, operations, and also forming that alliance that's stronger than any other Avenger squad out there. So we're hoping to take you on that journey with us and imagine that world where developers, security experts, and operations gurus can unite like the Avengers. So we're going to assemble against evil bugs and vulnerabilities. And today, Carl is going to, who's been around so long in the open source world. He's our CTO at Obsidian Systems. And Tanya, who has had 23 years of experience in developing software solutions for the South African market and abroad. They're going to present to you what Obsidian is seeing as some of the challenges, but also some of the secrets of DevSecOps out there. So without further ado, Tanya, thanks. Go ahead.
Okay, hi, welcome everyone. Yeah, so I'm just going to set the scene. So I think what we traditionally as technical people, when we talk about DevOps or DevSecOps, we think tech and tools. And I think today we're really here to just set the scene in terms of how do you actually approach DevSecOps, not just from a tooling perspective, so what tech you use to automate things, because it's actually about so much more. So I'm going to dive right into it. So we internally use 2 frameworks when we approach most IT problems for customers and internally. So the one is Smarter and the other one is CLAMS. So I'll just take you through what smarter means for us and how we use that as a framework to basically unpack problems. So I think often as technical people, we approach things from a technical perspective, as I said, like tooling. But when we solve technical problems, we also need to take a step back and sort of look at how do we strategize and align with the goals of the organization. So I think all of us know there's silos, and we often talk about the business and tech silos and how do we get them to collaborate better. So even if we approach DevOps, we need to sit back and say, okay, what are the strategies that the business wants to achieve, and how does DevSecOps support that from a business perspective? Then we want to look at, okay, our processes. So we want to understand what's in place currently. So what tools we use, what processes we have in place, what skills, what practices, and how does the culture contribute to the adoption of DevSecOps. And then once we have reflected on what's in place, we want to analyze that information and understand, can we extract some insights? Because if we have the data visible, we can look at the data and then determine where the gaps are. And then once we have that, we can identify which is like the low-hanging fruits and the opportunities that we can focus on to improve. So we want to choose that, and we all in tech, so we understand roadmaps and priorities and all of that. So then we want to prioritize that. And then we sort of want to loop back to the business, because we tend to talk different languages between business and tech. So how do we translate our findings into something that the business would understand? So, and I'll talk a little bit about the benefits and why we do DevSecOps, and so it's not just about automation and tools. And then once we have aligned with business, so we've translated the requirement, so we have a mutual understanding, then we can go into execution, which then falls into our traditional like technical roadmaps and backlogs, etc. And then, of course, as part of agile and continuous improvement, we want to reflect constantly on how we're doing and adopting and adjusting as we go, because we know priorities change. So Carl, over to you.
Yeah, and please feel free to like ask any questions in the chat box. We really are like ChatGPT. The only difference is there's two or a few humans answering real questions there at the back. But yes, so I'm here to talk about clams, and clams for us is almost like a foundational 5 pillars that we use to go in and approach problems or help customers like embrace DevOps in a better way. So the C stands for culture, the L for lean, A for automate, M for measure, and S for sharing, right? So when we think here about culture, we think about things that are very, that reinforces your culture to a certain extent, right? So in some organizations, right, there is this, people say like, yeah, I have no problems, right? And that's usually a sign of a very big problem when people say that. Other thing is that Peter Drucker used to say is that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So whatever happens in your organization, the culture is going to determine whether you're going to reach those outcomes, right? When you speak about lean, there's some principles of Kaizen in there, but lean basically says, let's take the big thing and break it down to smaller pieces, almost like a checklist. So how would I launch a rocket to space? I would have a checklist. Is there fuel? Is there a landing pad? Is people strapped in? And then say, have an ignition sequence of doing X, Y, Z. So breaking big things into smaller pieces. How do you eat the elephant? One bite at a time, right? So, and that's amazing when you start breaking things down. Automation, everybody uses automation. When you look at the phone book on your telephone, if you call it a telephone or a mobile phone or a cell phone, there's a shortcut for somebody that you frequently contact in a favorites, right? We like to automate things. You don't know the number, you see a name and you tap the name, right? So when we take repetitive tasks like entering a number, right? We try and automate things. So that's saying that let's take these repetitive tasks and enable them so that they can be effectively executed repeatedly in a consistent fashion without failure, right? So that's what it means to automate things. And just so that when somebody is sick, somebody else can run that task, and then that becomes great, right? So measure, right? People in business always love to measure things, right? But here, let me tell you something. When you go to the store and you have to put on pants, if you wear pants, some people don't, or a shirt even, you have to measure to see if you fit in it and how it looks. So it's not a bad thing. It's just to see how much you've progressed or regressed, grown or not grown in a specific area. So measurement's not bad, right? So when we bake a cake, we set the oven to 180 degrees and we measure the 2 cups of flour and we say it's 2 eggs and so much oil and whatever type of cake this is. But measurement's good. Why? It's good because you need to know the efficiency count. You need to understand that a cake takes that amount of time to bake. And then this helps us also with the automation. And automation is to say, it's going to take this long if we do it with automation, and then we have a predictable time where we can go and improve. Maybe we can bake a microwave cake. That's a bad idea. Well, microwave cake's delicious, but it's going to improve the delivery process. So we need to measure things to make sure that there's progress. If things take long, then then it's another thing, is not a place of improvement. So there's a nice quote that I like to say that what gets measured usually gets improved. And I think that is a very nice fundamental thing that we need to focus on. So I just quickly want to think here. I'm just grabbing a quote here because I don't want to get things wrong here. Beautiful quote by W. Edwards Deming says that without data, you're just another person with an opinion, right? And that's why measurement's important, because then you can give people data, and that is such a fundamental thing. Now, the last step of CLAMS is sharing, and that is a very important thing. Is that this is the thing that reinforces culture. So, in other words, if you take the things that you've learned and you've shared it with the other people in the organization, that makes it a cultural, it reinforces the culture, right? So people can understand that the way that you build things is consistent and awesome and beautiful. And then you just share the results, right? How do I build this? I share. The most fundamental thing as a kid on the playground is that when your mother said like, hey, you know what is nice? It's nice to share, right? It's nice to share your sweets. It's a fundamental principle that sharing is a good thing. So there's this beautiful quote by this guy, also what's his name? Yes, Tachi Ohono. He is the inventor of the Toyota manufacturing method, and a lot of the DevOps principles is based on the Toyota method or Kaizen or these things. And he said, I'm proud to be Japanese, and I wanted my country to succeed, and I believed my system was a way that could help us become a modern industrial nation. And that's why I had no problem with sharing it with other Japanese companies, even my biggest competitors. And that is a foundational thing, is that these things have the ability to really transform your organization, and sharing plays a role. And that means that we need to break down the barriers and share more frequently. Thank you. Tanya, I think you're muted.
Angela, you gonna, so I think now that we've reflected on the 2 frameworks that we sort of use to approach DevSecOps implementations and also maturing our own practices, it's really, we're gonna do a poll and just reflect on what do you think can help you mature your own DevSecOps journey.
So we'll leave the poll.
Yeah, so while, sorry.
Go ahead, Tanya.
Yeah, so while we're busy with that, so you can just select what you think can help you to approach DevSecOps practices. Just reflecting on why do we do DevSecOps. So we often don't it's almost like Carl said. So if we don't know why we're doing stuff and we don't have a way to measure it, then we also almost like just blindly running into a direction. And we're not working towards a goal. If we think about strategy, what's the goals? Where do we want to go? So DevSecOps, if we look at it more from a business outcome perspective, is more about reducing complexity. We want to improve our efficiency and effectiveness. So we'll share some more technical improvement metrics with you later of stuff that we've done where we got time down from, say, 40 minutes for deployments to 10 minutes, things like that. We want to increase speed and agility, which sort of talks about that. If we're working in the financial sector, and we work with a lot of financial sector clients as well, we want to ensure compliance. So how do we make sure that the policies and things that we subscribe to, whether it's from a security perspective, vulnerabilities, how do we make sure we comply with that? And how do we reduce risk for the business and lower technical debt? So what's the benefits for that? So that's the why, is we can go to market faster. So we can get more features into customers' hands on a regular basis, so we can make them happy as well. They don't have to sit around waiting for features to come onto the different systems we deploy. We can prevent data losses because we can more repetitively deploy data, but we can also measure it and monitor it, and we can respond to change. And because we make less mistakes, that's one of the benefits with DevOps, is we can protect our brand. So we don't have information being leaked, we don't have money losses. And if we do all of this stuff good, then we can grow the business. So we can sustain it, we know the business will be successful, and we in a good competitive place.
Awesome. So I wanted to share some results of the group, and this is the result in terms of the participants on here today. So strategy and automation leading in terms of what you guys are planning to adopt in terms of maturing your DevSecOps practices.
Okay, so I'm gonna step into, okay, so how do we approach measuring our DevSecOps capability at Obsidian and also at the customers we work with? So there's two frameworks that we sort of look at for that. So the one is DORA. I'm sure you have that State of DevOps survey results that you get. So that's sort of driven by the Google team, but there's a lot of guys that's doing research in the space. And OWASP, because traditionally DevOps was DevOps, but as you've noticed, we say DevSecOps. So an OWASP focuses 100% on security, on all aspects of security. So I'll unpack a little bit more about what that means. So what we've done is we've taken those frameworks and we've basically put an assessment framework together that teams can use. It's not an audit. So I've been asked before, it's not an audit, it's a tool there to empower yourself. So it's there for a team to maybe huddle together and go through it and understand how you mature. So where's the gaps? Where do we want to focus? How do we make our processes better? So we have two levels, level 1 and 2. So level 1 obviously draw into 2. And then on level 2, we have a set of questions that test the practices that you've adopted in the team. So if we look at DORA specifically and OWASP, these are the level 1 capabilities that we want to ask questions about and see how we're doing. So technical, I'll go a little bit into that. I'm not going to unpack all of it because there's like 52 capabilities that we measure on level 2. So that will take up most of the time. The technical are stuff like version control, code maintainability, CI/CD, etc. Architecture, we want to look at how we design applications, so not monolithic, but moving towards microservices so we can deploy faster. We want to look at our infrastructure. we're also looking at SRE. So that's also, the framework is not very mature, but Google has a lot of work that they do around SRE. So bringing that into the mix, operations, process methodology, measurement culture, and then security, which comes from OWASP specifically. So I'm just going to do a bit of a deep dive on the technical side. So these are some of the things that we look at. So within each of these level 2 capabilities, we then have a set of questions that we ask. So code maintainability, version control, trunk-based development, CI/CD, deployment automation, test data management, database change management, empowering team to choose tools, and shifting left. So Carl has his own opinion on this thing, but they do call it shifting left on security. So apparently it's incorrect because some people read from right to left, right? So that could be a controversial statement. But yeah, so how do we pull security into the dev team? So it's not just something that we worry about doing penetration testing on environments once applications are deployed, but how do we bring security into code level, basically on code level? On the infrastructure side, we look at cloud on-prem and containers and VMs. And then operations are your typical incident management, problem management, service management. And then we want to do cost reporting and understand where we're spending money. And then if we look at process and methodology, we look at team experimentation. So how do we play around with stuff? Do we make time for people to experiment different practices? So that's often not the case. So we, as organizations, are so focused as developers to get features out and deliver on that, but making time to experiment with things so we can incorporate that to become better. Streamlining change control processes. Do we get customer feedback? And if we get that feedback, do we use that feedback into our delivery pipelines? Visibility of work in the value stream, as well as working in small batches. So that's some of the level 2 capabilities. Security is quite comprehensive. So this is from the OWASP framework specifically. So here we're looking at the level 2 capabilities. So these are some of the things that we want to measure and ask ourselves questions about. So do we train? Do people actually know what it means to have a secure application from code all the way to it being deployed in production? What is our policies? What is our strategy and metrics? And then something that we often don't do is security requirements, for instance. So do we pull, if we have a backlog, do we actually have requirements that specifically talks to security? So you can almost think of that as like a non-functional requirement in a way, but we need to think about that. So we need to get the security experts on board in our team and make sure that their requirements are also put on the backlog and addressed into our cycles. And then there's different tools that you can use like SAST, DAST, IAST to basically test within your pipeline, integrate that into those pipelines. And yeah, then architecture as well. Is the architecture secure, etc. So I'm not going to go into all of that, but we can share some links with you. So here I've just got an example of some of the questions that we ask. I'll share a link with you towards the end. So if you do want to complete the assessment, just to get a feel for what it's about, then we'll share the results with you as well. So you can basically look at where is your maturity at the different capabilities I just stepped through, and where can you potentially improve. So we ask some questions. Things like this is just an example. So where we say what type of branching strategies you have. We also talk about different tools. So in each of those capabilities, there's obviously tool sets that we use. So what tools are we using? Is it a good mix? We get a view of if we have different tool sets in different parts of the organization, especially in larger organizations. And then the rest of the questions is really talking about the maturity. So we're saying strongly agree. So that is when you basically an elite performer. So you know that you've checked all of the boxes and you do it consistently and repetitively, and it's part of your culture and your practices. So it's been well adopted. And strongly disagree means that you're not addressing it at all. So that shows an opportunity for improvement. Yeah, so that's sort of the framework that we use. So now that we have the framework, and I'll go through just what the results of this assessment looks in a little bit, we want to talk about metrics, and this links to the measurements that Carl spoke about. So where do we get the metrics? So we have hundreds of tools sitting in the organization. We have monitoring tools, we have visual management tools like Jira, monitoring like, I don't know, Singa, Datadog, Carl, I don't know if you, Grafana, Prometheus, if you want to add any lists there. CIDC
lots and lots.
Yeah, so some customers that we work with, for instance, I think had 85 different instances of monitoring tools deployed. So that probably shows an area for improvement, and that's also why the tools, asking the questions about what tools do we use where is also important. Testing tools, ITSM systems like Jira Service Desk, and then compliance and vulnerability tools like Mondu, that scans compliance against benchmarks like CIS, etc., and scanning for vulnerabilities and making that visible. So these are the main DevSecOps metrics that should be measured in the team. And this is some of the measurements that you can use to basically set an initial goal for yourself. So I'm going to share some of the metrics that we pull out of tools. So we'll talk about what tools we're getting it from as well. But meantime, to recover, change failure rates and volumes, I'll unpack them on each of the slides. So this is what you want to measure, and in those tools, find where you're pulling the data from and making it centrally visible to your team. So this is all our own metrics and our own tools that we built and deploy. So this just talks about change volume. So how many features do we release, and on what frequency do we release it? So so this is some metrics that I pulled into. So this comes out of Jira. This is like a standard chart. So you can basically see the items that were closed out over time. This I pulled into a different charting tool. So this is not stock standard out of something like Jira, but we can over here look at the change volume. So these are the number of features that are getting released in these months. So you can see that's sort of fairly consistent. So the size of the team hasn't changed. So they're consistently delivering. So this also gives us insight into velocity. So when we planning, we know how much we can take on in a specific month to push out. This is a fairly small team that I pulled this metrics from. So they're actually doing a lot of work every month. And then the number of days between releases. So we're pushing to release more frequently. So you can see this trend is coming down. And then the number of releases that we do in a specific month. So if you have this visible, you can have a conversation, you can set a goal and a target, and then basically measure against that and reflect as a team against those volumes. Then the other thing we want to look at is lead time. So this is basically the time since a story is logged. So once it goes onto the backlog and when it gets implemented. So this is also Jira metric that you can pull very easily from the system on the data that's already there. So you can set a goal for, we reflect on quality, so bugs as well as features. So the bug metric should be lower because we don't want bugs that's sitting and logged, not being addressed as quickly as possible. So over here, you can see our goal is 2 days. We're sitting on 8 days, so that's not great. We need to get that down. And then since a feature is locked on the backlog, it takes us 80 days to get that implemented. But what is good if we look at cycle time, so, and we use these two metrics together, is to say, until a developer picks up a story. So this is now in a sprint, it's on a sprint backlog, and we put something in progress. it takes us 8 days to close out a feature and 4 days to do a bug. So you can see sort of if we look at these two together, even though the backlog days are high, but we have a very good groomed backlog. So we have a roadmap for like 6 months. So this is not necessarily a bad metric. But if we look at the delivery time, we can see that because we're running 2-week sprints, which is 10 days, we generally, a feature, if it goes into delivery, it gets closed out in that same sprint. So that's the type of cadence that you would like to see. This is also just cycle time metric. So this is the cycle time report on your Jira sprint boards. So over here, you can see this, we used to be on 50 days and we've actually come down to a rolling average of 1.4 days. And this is looking at cycle time specifically. So the filter was set to only look at in-flight statuses, whether it includes testing. And in this specific metric in our team, we actually include, this days here include system integration testing and QA by the customer. So it's not just internal QA. So this is actually when we in a sprint close out a feature, it means it's ready to go to prod. So that takes all of that processes into account as well. And then defect escape rate. So this talks about bugs that customers find in production. So ideally we don't want that. So we want to drive that down. So you can see a good metric that within 2 months, 8 bugs being found to 1 in a month. So this type of metric we want to keep low because our testing practices are measured by this. So if we get a lot of bugs, we need to reflect on this and see, okay, what is causing us to miss the quality issues in internal testing, and basically making that available to customers. Over here, you can just say number of quality stuff versus stories. So this is not customer bugs, so you can actually see the difference if we look at the metrics here. So it's for the same time frame that I've pulled the data. So we're looking at 4 months. So you can see only, say, 8 and 7 bugs found here in prod. But we actually have quite a high number of bugs that's logged internally during the testing cycle. So that's also a good sign. We can see that we're catching the stuff before we push it out to customers. SLAs, we're all familiar with. I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but we want to get those metrics all down. So this you can pull from Jira Service Desk or any of your other service desk tools. And then, yeah, we're going to get onto more of the technical stuff. So Carl, over to you.
Yeah, so when we look at CI/CD metrics, it's obviously it's a good idea to go and see how many times your builds and deploys happen and how often you test and things like that. So here you can see there's some analytics here. Is 145 pipelines that's getting triggered and 0 has failed. Beat that. No, I'm joking. But yeah, it's this is not how it used to look. It used to look quite frequently. We had a lot of failures and builds and things like that didn't go well. But now I think because we're doing tests on a lot more smaller bits and pieces of work, we are also have the ability to catch bugs sooner or things that fail in infrastructure a lot sooner. So if we can move on to the next slide, please.
So Paul, this is on GitLab, right?
Yeah, this specifically on GitLab. So we do specific integration testing on GitLab. So here's other pipeline metrics, right? This is let me just see. This is usually how long the pipelines take to go and run through. So we used to have pipelines that ran in virtual machines with some of our integration tests, and the problem with that was that as soon as you spin up a virtual machine, it consumes a lot of memory and takes a lot of time to spin that up. So our pipelines would usually run against, I think it was about 12 different types of machines in like 35 minutes. We switched that out to containers, and that reduced our time of the pipelines down to 2 minutes I think the maximum is about 10 minutes for a pipeline. So that's a good reduction for us. So yeah, there's a few things that you can continually go in and make sure that you break things down into smaller bits and pieces. It doesn't necessarily mean big bang changes, but it could be just little slight technology switches in and out to go and do things. Yeah, so this is more other deployments that we're doing, just going through and seeing the amount of pipelines that's getting triggered per code base. Oh, back. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Oh no, we're done there. No, we're done there. We're done there as well. Yeah. So other important metrics to pull in is, here's a tool called Datadog. Database metrics, very smart way of integration into PostgreSQL. If you see here, this is basically just checking a lot of queries. This specific one is just seeing if there's what's happening, right? Is there any errors? Is there any incidents being reported on that? Just standard operations. I think on the specific Postgres database, there was some activity like that was scheduled at 11:27, right? Not bad to measure things, just kind of important to know when things are happening, so that when you start getting alerts that you know what's happening. So if we move on to the next slide. So, previous one, thank you. Here's actually the amount of queries running in that database and the amount of like seconds, milliseconds, and little nanoseconds that these things take. Very important when you go and try and do deep dive stuff is to say that the more you know about something, the more you have the ability to go and troubleshoot something. So in other words, if a query takes long because the query is not optimized, or it's getting out too much data or things like that, then maybe you need to go and rewrite a specific query, because that could affect the entire database's performance, or the query or a front end could be slow because the database query is slow as well. So yeah, next slide. Yeah, so here's an application test that we're basically doing here for Jira. More, you can see here that amount of time of people actually doing queries on a specific site as well. So here I want you to notice the security. Very nice to go and see in real time, to go and see, okay, there's 31 vulnerabilities in the specific instance, right? Like it's a test instance and not a production instance, but there is vulnerabilities in there, right? But this is still on the same page or in the same view of all the other metrics. Why? Because it's important to consolidate these things to make sure that when you see incidents or security or SLOs or deployments or error tracking, that you have a quick view to see exactly what the story is, right? So it's important. So next slide. Here we go, and this is endpoints in that specific application on getting hit. So here you can see, if you look at the status codes there, they're all 200. That's HTTP status codes. So that means that the pages are successfully loaded in an acceptable amount of time. I don't know. You might see there that the second query there from the top, the notifications one, ran a little bit long, and obviously the latency got broken down too, and then obviously the global config one, that the way where the mouse is as well. There you can see exactly what's the problem, and then obviously the problem there is on 302. That could just be authentication problem or like a link problem or something like that. But it's important to measure these things, because then you can go in and say, okay, this specific endpoint is not responding well. This thing is not doing the right thing, or yeah, it's very important. Okay, to going on to security compliance now. I love security compliance. Why? Because you can get into a lot of trouble if this is not right. But it's probably one of the areas that people have the most ambiguity, or that's a very big word for Afrikaans person, but it's very complicated to get the information out that you need to go and do. So this is a tool called Mondu. Mondu does security scanning, but not just for pipelines and infrastructure or cloud infrastructure or cloud services. It also does CVEs, security patches that's out of date, CIS benchmarks, misconfigurations, lots of different things. And isn't it nice to have a report card to say that this container, and C is not for container there, C is the security rating, that it's not as good as it's supposed to be. And you can see here that, yeah, from a security point of view, that one's got an F. Platform vulnerability policy, it's a F. And luckily the thing is not end of life because that is the A, right? But there you can see here in the top right-hand corner, there's top recommended actions that needs to be taken. We can go on to the next slide because that's just a query container. Here's one for the AWS account, some misconfigurations in there. There's a few that's high, there's a few that's low, and there's a few that is critical. Yes, in that specific one. I don't know, Tanya, do you want to talk about Taco's infrastructure compliance, or should I?
You can go for
Okay,
it.
cool. Thank you. Thank you. Right. So we have this tool called TACO, which stands for Testing, Automation, Compliance, and Observability. Beautiful acronym for something that is such a key part of modern infrastructure and IT operations. Is that we believe that obviously in modern industries, you need to go and test before you go deploy. So testing is important. Automation, you've heard automation a lot today, is very important in the organization as well. So it does automation very well, does compliance very well, and does observability very well. So when you bring those 4 functions together, that is obviously called TACO. So in this specific view, here you can see your current estate. Is there a state of compliance? Now, obviously, you can see that there is 43 misconfigurations there on that specific compliance profile, but there is 1,541 tests passing. So not too bad, but still a 97.3% rating, right? Which I guess is better than the current metric scores for math. But let's carry on to the next slide because that's controversial. Yeah. So what are your biggest DevSecOps challenges, right? So what's the challenges that you face, right? Is it continuous delivery or testing or security or experience or methodology, right? Working in small batches.
So you can do the poll for that. So
yeah, and I'm sure it's popped up here in front of you.
What people are struggling with.
Yeah, so and please let those questions come in. I see that there is a question up here, or like in here, that says it's okay to observe everything in the DevSecOps journey, but what are the good things to go and look for in my IT estate, right? So I think good things to go and look for is basically things that we've just had a look at. Is that it's one thing when we talk about observability to go in and say, what is the database doing, right? That's on its own, it's nothing, right? A database of what? The database of kittens on the internet or whatever, right? So here's the thing, is like if a database is connected to a front end, so let's imagine, I always use this, you're running Takealot. So at the back end, there's probably a database that's storing some transactions and order information, right? And some warehousing to see if an item is available. If that database is slow, the front end is slow, right? So you need to understand what is the business impact. So things that you need to go and observe in your infrastructure or your estate is to go and see what is my big business impact and how can I break that down into server network latency, load average on a machine, security misconfigurations or overcomplicated deployments, or something in that stack can be broken down into little bits and pieces that feeds into the bigger picture of business impact. So think about that, or you can ask a follow-up question if we haven't tickled your fancy. And I can see there's another question here. We're all having issues with silos in the organization. How does Obsidian eliminate the barriers and assist collaboration? Very simple. We send email to people. No, I'm joking. That's not how we do it. We obviously, right? Because you don't need another email in your inbox, and nobody reads email, to be honest, right? They just scan. If there's not an @call need to do something, you ignore it, mark it spam, archive. I don't know what you do. But the big thing is with collaboration is to have sessions and say like, listen, I'm really struggling. Yes, it's hard to be vulnerable in an organization where everybody's perfect, right? Perceived to be perfect, that you're having issues, right? That vulnerability or creating psychological safety, and that helps to break down a silo because it says, I need your help with this. I don't understand what's happening here. Can you come and have a look? Can we do a screen share session? I can show you something. Or that big thing about just asking for help, or how do you optimize something, or how do you do this right? That's a very important thing. It's like not everybody is experts. Everybody can Google, but you can be the only person that finds that answer on Stack Overflow or Google for the answer or ask ChatGPT, right? But if you don't share that, right, there's this quote, beautiful quote about saying that knowledge shared is knowledge multiplied. Like it's a totally like a empowered. You like it increases exponentially in its power to transform an organization if knowledge is shared. But keeping it for yourself is not still not a nice thing to do.
Okay, so I'm gonna, before we get to more questions, I'm just gonna wrap up the webinar. So we spoke a little bit earlier about the two frameworks that we use, DORA and OWASP. So this basically just visualizes. So we ask all of those questions. So we have over a few hundred questions that sits in the different capabilities. So based on the role that you perform in the company, so whether you're working on the ops side, whether you're developer, tester, business analyst, project manager, we all work with different facets. So, so based on the role that you have, you get presented with the questions that you would actually know the answers to, or to the capabilities that would be important for you. So over here, you have the level 1 ones, this is level 2. And then here it shows you the maturity score out of 5. So over here, you can see it automatically highlights areas. So this is data from the survey that highlights areas where there is room for improvement. So, so these are like the orange is sort of between 3 and 4 or below 4 is like medium maturity. Okay, so there's still room for improvement here. So it's really about looking at these. So over here, you can see there is a big issue in the companies that has done the assessment with us at looking at monitoring and observing things, and also getting proactive failure notification, because we want to preempt alerts and addressing that before the customer becomes aware of it. So that links to the metric we discussed earlier as well about the defect escape rate. So we don't want customers to tell us something is wrong. We want to pick that up and fix it before it impacts their experience. And then over here, you can see it sort of drills down into the different capabilities. So this just shows us how we're doing as a team or as an organization in the different capabilities. This you can then drill down into the question. So that's really where the power sits in the assessment, and then see within customer feedback, which of the practices that we addressed in the questions are contributing to that score being lower. So, and then you can sort of almost use those questions as the different ways to basically look at items that you can add for optimization, because that's part of the agile practice, is to say, we know these things are wrong, so we want to add that to the backlog. So we're not just pushing features, but we also want to make time for us to improve and optimize our DevSecOps practices. Yeah, so we'll share the link with you if you're keen to just do the assessment and see what it's about, and then we can share the results with you. So we'll share the results with you anonymously of all the companies, data that we're doing. So if you complete the survey, we'll also ongoing, because we work with multiple organizations in the space, share the data with you. So you can also see how your areas are comparing to what other companies are experiencing or having difficulties with in South Africa specifically. Don't know, Cole, if you want to add something here.
Yeah, so no, not really.
Okay, cool. So that is it. I don't know, we're going to open up for questions now. So thanks for joining us today. I hope you learned something. If you have any questions or things that you want to ask, we can call, or you're going to step through that on your side.
Yeah, I'll be here. Yeah.
So we will certainly send out all our contact details, post the webinar as well, and on this webinar link that you can reach us on obsidian.co.za, or sales@obsidian.coza. I do have two questions that we would like to pose, and I think, Tanya, this one is for you. It's a lot of complex things. You've shown so many things that need to be measured and so many things that we should be doing in terms of DevSecOps. So where do we start? How do you suggest we get started on this DevSecOps journey?
So I think there's something that we call a value point when we say work with requirements, if we deliver against software. So it's almost, I'm just going to share my screen again and just get back to the dashboard. Because I think it's really about looking at, okay, so we have issues here, but it's not just about saying we're going to do priority based on where the lowest maturity is, because sometimes it could be difficult for us to implement these things. It could be difficult to get going with it. So we can add a complexity point for ourselves to this as well. And if something is more complex and it's going to take longer, we might want to focus on areas that has like a lower, it's quicker to get the up and the improvement, and there's a lot of value in implementing that improvement, but it's not too complex. So it's small changes that we can make. So once we've reflected on the maturity, we want to have those discussions as a team and sit around the table, and then based on the value point, the complexity it takes to implement stuff, as well as the maturity, we can then decide, okay, let's log a story or a feature on the backlog and then prioritize it into the sprints from there.
Awesome. Thanks, Tanya. And then Carl, what came up quite popular in terms of what people are currently implementing and also want to focus more on in the future is things around automation. So what are the good things to automate and what are the bad things to automate? And is there such a thing?
So I usually say is the smaller things that is 3 or 4 or 5 step process is usually a good place to start with automation. Leave the bigger things later when you feel a bit more comfortable with that, right? And little bits of automation can actually fit together very nicely because you just try and daisy chain things. It tends to work pretty well. So yeah, I would say things that is a simple task. Do this, right? And then based on and then start branching off those things. So little bites at a time. It doesn't need to be big things, but it can be transformational if all these little things stack up to one another. It becomes really transformational in an organization.
And I think we're going to wrap up. I just want to thank you. And Carl, I think you've summed it up. I think you've summed the whole webinar up. DevSecOps is not a small task and it is a journey, but it's one little step at a time, right, in order to conquer it. So we're super excited. Thank you, everybody, for your time. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to hearing from you and hope that you found some value in the webinar. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we hope you have a great time and experience some fun things in this world of DevSecOps.
Bye, everybody.